Good afternoon, good evening, good morning. My name's Andy Myers. I am the Subsea Director or Subsea Well Intervention Service Director for OSRL. So I look after the subsea services, which include the SWIS services and the OSPRAG service, which is ring-fenced to the UKCS on behalf of our members. You've got the pleasure of spending an hour with me today talking through this presentation, which is around the subsea well response readiness evolution. I'll just pass over to George to do a brief introduction. George Stead, who's joining me today, and then we'll start working through the content. George, over to you.
Yep. Hi, everyone. My name is George Stead. I'm a technical consultant with OSRL. Formerly, I was with BP and I was responsible for source control planning in various regions, including Australia, North Sea, West Africa, Canada, and Trinidad.
Excellent. Thanks, George. Well, we'll start getting going. So the purpose of the presentation today, the webinar today, is really to provide useful information and considerations to you as attendees for preparing for and responding to a subsea well incident, how our services have evolved to meet the industry guidance, and that will include evolution of equipment and the service provisions themselves. At various points during the presentation material, we will refer to IOGP documentation. IOGP are a key stakeholder of OSRL, and there are at least 3 very important documents related to subsea well response. There's 594, which is around source control emergency response planning guidance, 592, which is response time modelling guidance, and 591, which is around training and competency for the source control branch. So we'll start moving through the content. There's 2 introductory slides prior to the, basically an overview of the agenda, and then we will roll on from there. Hopefully the slides change. Does that work for you, George? Can you see whether that slide's moved? Yeah, okay. So just as an introduction, 2 slides to start with. First one is related to OSRL, who we are, just in case anyone who's attending the webinar doesn't know about us. We are the largest international industry-funded oil spill response cooperative, and we're owned by the majority of oil and gas producers and transportation companies globally. We have trained and we're ready with personnel trained in response to effectively respond anywhere in the world. Our members are our shareholders. Our shareholding is not for profit purposes, and we truly operate as a membership type arrangement. You'll note there on the left, the bottom picture, that shows a piece of the subsea equipment that we'll be talking about more through this webinar. And the subsea services are offered as supplementary services to meet your operational needs under the banner of the overall OSRL membership for traditional surface response and incident management. So that's an intro about OSRL. The inception of the subsea services was after Macondo, Montara, and other significant industry events. Industry representatives came together under the banner of IOGP and created what was called the GIRG, or the Global Incident Response Group. The GIRG was industry coming together to set the guidelines and basis for the joint industry project called the Subsea Well Response Project. The services that we have as our supplementary services focused on subsea well response are a direct result of that project, with the pretext that it was the long lead items that would be required to respond to a subsea well incident, and the seed, basically the inception of the services to provide additional support within the membership of the subsea services. So the key equipment that was delivered, the first phase of the from the SWIS project was delivered in 2012, and that was the capping stacks. There are 4 capping stacks within the OSRL subsea services, 1 in Brazil, 1 in Norway, 1 in South Africa, and 1 in Singapore. All of them are 15K rated, excluding the South Africa capping stack. The Brazil and the Norway capping stack are BOP RAM-based systems, and South Africa and Singapore are valve-based systems. But we'll talk a bit more about that. So the capping stacks were the first phase of the project, and in conjunction with that first phase was the Subsea Incident Response Toolkit. That came slightly later, roughly around 2013. And the Subsea Incident Response Toolkit is really the first strike package. It's oceaneering equipment, and it's located in Brazil and Norway. Again, we'll provide some more details around the equipment as we roll through this webinar. The next phase of the project was the containment system, and that service came into inception in 2015. And the containment system is the only part or services that have assets which are not directly air freightable. And we'll talk about more around the system that pulls together under the containment banner, but essentially the large flexibles, if you think about production flexibles, due to the minimum bend radii, it's not possible for them to be air freighted within, globally. So those are located within Brazil, within UK, and Singapore. The containment system is predominantly, the top sides is located in the UK, and the subsea equipment is located in the States. So a truly global spread for the containment system. The final phase of the SWIS project was the offset installation equipment. Again, we'll go into that in more detail, but this is equipment for where it is not possible to get vertical access above the wellhead to be able to intervene. And this equipment was developed by Saipem and is stored in Trieste in Italy. That's the light blue dot on the map. As we've progressed through the service, various other pieces of equipment have come into our inventory. We now have water column monitoring equipment, which is located in Houston. The dispersant delivery system, again, which is located in Houston. And again, we'll talk more in detail around those assets as we move through this presentation. You'll note that there's the purple, which is the air freight capping stack. We developed in 2018 dedicated transportation skids for the Norway and the Singapore capping stack for direct air freight with very minor disassembly, just the jewelry being removed off the capping stack. So essentially in one piece in an AN124 airframe. So again, that's additional capability that's been developed over time. So that really kind of sets the scene of inception and some of the hardware developments that we've had over the last few years. So looking at the agenda, what we're going to be focused on talking about today, it's, those familiar with this, we're looking at both sides of the bow tie here, with clearly the incident in the middle. We're focusing on preparing for the unlikely but potentially very high consequence event of a subsea well incident, and then on the other side, responding to that event. If we look at the prepare side, we'll be giving some guidance around the source control emergency response plans and the considerations for those, logistics elements, talking about vessel strategy for response, and then importantly around training and exercising, and tools that we've developed in order to be able to help support our members in that regard. And on the right side, with regards to response, we'll be giving a good overview of the equipment, and then other framework agreements that we have within the services, uniquely mutual aid for personnel, specialist personnel, and of course the global subsea response network. And we'll talk about how those partners that work with us in that network, how we bring all that together. And you'll note at the bottom it will conclude basically with a membership overview of how that is offered to our members. So anything you want to add, George, on the agenda before we roll in?
No, I think that's quite extensive. Thank you.
Okay, so starting then with response, we wanted to start on the right side, and then we'll focus in towards the end of the presentation with regards to preparing for a subsea well response and considerations. So looking at the initial activities, if we the way we've set this presentation up is really we're trying to give you an indication around the activities in a logical sequence of events. And so clearly planning for the initial response activities and making sure that everything is in place is critical. An effective response clearly is that the source is controlled within the shortest period of time possible. So if we look at the equipment on the response side that we have within the equipment inventory in order to be able to help in that regard, we have the SIRT equipment or Subsea Incident Response Toolkits. These are the Oceaneering are the OEM of this equipment. They're the items which are stored in Brazil and Norway. And that equipment is split into essentially 3 modules. They're all containerized, stored, maintained, fully response ready, containerized for rapid global mobilization, but ultimately in 3 packages within that inventory. So this is really thinking about response strategies, and the SIRT equipment provides enablers for the subsequent missions. So in the event of a subsea well incident, the first mission that will be attempted and should be planned for is related to the BOP, potentially BOP intervention. So clearly you've had issues, challenges, and the first attempt, if this is, obviously it's incident specific, but would be in a logical sequence, would be to potentially intervene on the existing BOP to try and close that and therefore address the source. We have a bunch of equipment in the inventory. We have the skids, which can be run under our ROVs in order to be able to provide the hydraulic capacity to shut the BOP rams. And also we have subsea accumulator modules, which through manifolding can provide the same ability. So the equipment, the subsea hardware to be able to complete those missions. Just to be clear, we don't have the ROVs within the service. That's considered as well owner equipment. And as we go through this presentation, there'll be a number of elements which are well incident owner equipment that need to be planned for. So the first approach would be BOP intervention. There would clearly then this would follow with regards to site survey and debris clearance. Again, we hold the ROV tooling and we hold medium to light debris clearance equipment currently. So the types of grappling hooks, cutters, grinders, etc., which could potentially be used to remove debris and clear the site in advance of the capping missions. And the final part is really around subsea dispersant application. Subsea dispersant application could be a key enabler to be able to permit well capping on the well. And with regards to subsea dispersant application, we have the subsea elements within the SIRT equipment, the oceaneering equipment, which are the hydraulic flying leads, the wands, again some manifolding, and the coiled tubing termination heads. But we also have complementary equipment, as you can see here in the bottom right on the slide, which is the DDS or dispersant delivery system. And I'll talk more about that, and George and I will talk more about that in a few minutes. But the point being, the SIRT package is really to hopefully be able to address the issue with BOP intervention. If not, then provide the enabling missions to be able to promote capping of the well. Anything you want to add, George?
Nope, it's all good so far, Andy.
I'll leave you to jump in if there is anything. Looking at BOP intervention in more detail, clearly, as I said, this is an unlikely event that the rig fails to close the BOP. An emergency BOP intervention is therefore required. So it's the ROV mounted intervention skids, subsea accumulation, BOP intervention, manifolding, and what we also have within the inventory in Norway, we have a nitrogen charge kit, and in Brazil we have a nitrogen generator, such that we can rapidly recharge or charge the subsea accumulator modules prior to mobilization. The next piece of equipment, as I gave an intro to, was really around site survey and debris clearance. So as I say, Toolkit contains various tools for removing debris. It's all more lighter, medium weight intervention equipment. So grappling, butting, etc. And of course, importantly, 2D, 3D sonar tooling to be able to understand and potentially map out the well status. So moving into subsea dispersant application, we have two complementary pieces of equipment and services which come together in the event of being required for a response. So I'll focus first in on the dispersant delivery system. So the dispersant delivery system is shown here on the left with regards to the system that can be mobilized by if required. And this system includes the downline, so the downline hose, topsides pumping, and additional complementary ancillaries which will work with the existing SIRT equipment in order to be able to provide a full capability for the dispersant to be deployed subsea. Alternatively, of course, you could use a configuration with coiled tubing. We don't have the coiled tubing or coiled tubing units within our inventory, but the SIRT equipment is designed to be able to be compatible and again complete a similar system. So there's really two kind of options here. The DDS system was designed to be air freightable globally and is stored in Houston and containerized, and the reels with the hose are air freightable within 747 aircraft.
I guess the key message there, Andy, is that OSRL are positioned to give all the equipment required for a subsea dispersant application, with the exception of the vessel, and the dispersant itself being available through separate agreements.
Correct. So we'll get to an end of how it all comes together, but yeah, we're essentially here closing the loop. So you have the ability to access the services and equipment for subsea dispersant application. Another important element of that is, of course, water column monitoring. And again, we have the associated equipment for that service and access to the associated scientists in order to be able to provide those services. So again, it's all stored, containerized in Houston, ready for rapid global mobilization. And the system is essentially a downline wire with a rosette, and then laboratories that can be run on the back deck of the vessels of opportunity, and it's stored in Houston, maintained by CSA, who are the OEM of the equipment, so ready for rapid mobilization globally. So we've now been through the initial response activities, which, as I said, was potentially BOP intervention, then looking at the site, potentially debris removal if that's required, and subsea dispersant application. These activities are the enablers in order to be able to potentially cap the well if that is required. And the primary source control devices in that regard are the capping stacks. As I said at the start, we have 4 of those within the stockpile. 1 in Brazil, 1 in Norway, 1 in Singapore, 1 in South Africa, 3 of them 15K, 1 10K. The 10K is South Africa. 2 of the capping stacks, as I noted, were rapidly air freightable in AN124 aircraft. You can see that picture on the right, and there's a short video in a couple of slides' time, which shows the mobilization exercise we completed in 2018 in that regard. So you can see the cap on the left. Our capping stacks, I say the 4 that we have within the inventory currently, are all based on the same principles and the same framework. So we have the main thing that changes between them is the central bore and the main isolation. So if you're looking on the left, the Singapore and the South Africa caps, as I indicated, are 7 1/16 inch, either 10K in the case of South Africa or 15K in the case of Singapore, valve-based solution, and the Brazil and the Norway stacks are 18 3/4 inch, 15K rated ram-based systems, NOV rams. But the point is that there's redundancy in the service, and membership provides you access to primary and secondary. So it's first and second, 2 out of the 4 capping stacks that we have on offer globally at the members' discretion. But if there was further redundancy that was required, they're all built on the same framework structure and pipe work outside of the main board. So the next slide should have a video, if I roll onto that, and that will give an overview of a mobilization exercise we completed in, I think it was the end of 2018, if I remember correctly, where we moved the Norway capping stack, which is one of the large 15K stacks, to the airport, loaded it in an AN124 airframe, and completed a test flight. So I'll just move on to that now. So as I say, that was a mobilization trial, really, full-scale mobilization activity that we completed in 2018. And just to confirm, the capping stack was in the aircraft when it took off there with that footage. Rolling on then to further equipment which supplements capping missions if required. I spoke about it at the start, that the final phase of the Subsea Well Response project was the offset installation equipment. Now, the offset installation equipment is required where vertical access may not be possible. So in previous, when we've been talking about the enabling missions and potentially running capping stack, and we'll talk more about considerations for that later on, you're essentially assuming that you can have vertical access above the wellhead, and you could use a standard, offshore deployment vessel in order to be able to run the equipment. Where that is not possible and you cannot get a vertical access, the SWIS project developed a system which was the offset installation equipment for exactly that scenario. And what the offset installation equipment provides is the ability to be able to lift the capping stack subsea from a safe offset in order to be able to protect people and assets working outside of an exclusion zone. The premise of the project was that there would be a 500-meter radius exclusion zone around the incident well, and as I say, the missions then that we've been talking about previously, capping, deployment, and installation, etc., would be completed from that safe offset. The system was developed in order to be able to lift the capping stack subsea. So you can see here it's approximately 150-ton capacity, but also articulate the capping stack a full 360 degrees. So there is a cardant joint, and there's a subsequent slide which I can talk through in more detail, but there's a cardant joint that provides this capability, including being able to accommodate potentially wellhead misalignment. The cardant joint also provides for the soft landing capability. Clearly, it's important to consider the status of the sealing faces as the capping stack is brought into the capping interface point, and then designed for up to high gas flow rate wells with regards to its capability. So if you look at the main component of the OIE system, it's actually the OIE Carrier. You can see in the red circle, that's a capping stack, and you can see here the main frame, including the cardant joint, which is in the middle. You can also see the 4 buoyancy tanks, which are connected to the frame, which provides the ability to be able to lift the equipment subsea. The weight of this carrier is about 236 tons in air, so that needs to be considered with regards to mobilisation and planning. And it's obviously quite large. If you look at it here, 13 meters by 10 by 13. But it was a significant R&D project by the SWIS, and that was delivered in 2018. Just I can see there's a number of questions coming into the chat. What we'll do is we'll address those questions at the end when we get to the end of the slides. So just to summarize the initial response, how everything comes together. So you can see here the big green box, that's the capping services. And within that you have the SIRT services, or in the blue, the light blue, and that has the 3 supporting packages for the initial response. There's complementary equipment within the capping services with regards to the DDS and the water column monitoring, as I spoke about, and the capping stacks and potentially OIE if that's required, if vertical access is not possible. You'll note off to the left, it's not integrated into the subsea services, but there is OSRL have a separate supplementary service agreement, which is the global dispersant stockpile, which you can potentially get access to as well. And again, that provides therefore the dispersant for subsea application. So that's the end of the first part with regards to the initial response and initial considerations. Moving on to supplementary options for scenarios where it's not possible to be able to shut in the well. The SWIS project, as in the second phase of the project, developed a solution, again based on the principles of providing the long lead items to put in place globally the potential for essentially think about it like a pilot production system to be able to recover the fluids to surface for onward processing and offloading. We don't have, if you look in this diagram here, clearly we don't have the the vessels associated with this or quite a lot of the other equipment, but we do have within the services a lot of the topsides equipment, so the coolers, pumps, incinerator pumps equipment, and we have the subsea, importantly, the subsea infrastructure as well, which includes subsea flow lines, flow line termination units, riser bases, and other equipment to be able to pull this together. It also has the chemical system as well, potentially for flow assurance considerations. So we have a chemical distribution system as well. Clearly, if you're getting into the containment scenario and capping has not been successful, this is will require significant engineering, and really from a point of view of guidance, this is a down to members really discretion around how far pre-planning is for containment. Anything you want to add to containment, George?
Just hopefully you'll never need it, because it's a very, very complex undertaking.
I couldn't agree more. So that's really, we've now walked our way through all of the equipment on the response side, and now going to talk a little bit more around additional service provisions prior to talking about the preparation, which is really where we all need to be focused. So this is an introduction to how we can facilitate an integrated response. One of the elements, and we're uniquely, and our framework of membership actually is pretty unique in this regard, in allowing us the ability to be able to provide mutual aid. So we have an existing mutual aid framework agreement for personnel under the Subsea membership agreements, and it is essentially the framework that permits the potential for sharing of resources, focused in this case around source control branch in the event of a response, and that's important particularly for considerations of a sustained response. This is something that has been very well received globally by regulators, etc. And I'm pleased to say that all of the long-term members are participating within that agreement. In the event of a mobilisation of OSRL, participant in the mutual aid framework agreement can request that this is triggered, and OSRL help facilitate that by providing agreed secondary terms between participants, but also the points of contact between the companies in order to be able to kick off mutual aid of personnel. So as we roll on later into the presentation, talking around preparation, and we talk about the incident management team, etc., focusing specifically on the source control branch, then mutual aid is clearly an important consideration for the personnel and the personnel you may need for a sustained response. Talking a little bit around the reason for the global subsea response network prior to talking about who's actually participating in it. But OSRL facilitate the global subsea response network to be able to provide access to all of the expertise, both for planning, which we can provide directly through ourselves, or in a response. So these participants have agreements which can be used potentially by the well incident owner to provide that comprehensive response. The point being that the risk of a major well control event has not changed. Potentially the impacts are greater. Clearly there's a lot of focus, and the need for mitigations is stronger. And what the GSRN delivers is the mitigating enablers through preparation, planning, exercising and responding to basically bring everyone together to collaborate. And we've worked up these agreements as part of our SWIS ecosystem, if you want to call it that, our subsea services, the wider context of the global subsea response network, and the current participants are ADC Energies. So with a focus on rig audit and inspections that may be required to support relief well missions. We have Add Energy as well control specialists, Bertling logistics support, CSA, who are the OEM of the water column monitoring equipment. This provides access to the water column monitoring services, the associated scientists, etc. Genesis and InOcean, who are both Technip FMC companies, who we have access through Technip FMC. Neptune, who are MMA Offshore, again a engineering consultancy and fabricator based in Aberdeen. Oceaneering, who are the OEM of the SIRT equipment. Saipem, who are the OEM of the offset installation equipment. Technip FMC, who obviously are globally recognized installation and EPC contractor. Clarksons, the largest shipbroker in the world, and Maritech, their division of technology. Cyanic, who are the OEM of the Dispersant delivery system. Trendsetter, who are OEM of the capping stacks. Wood, again globally recognized EPC contractor, and they were actually the systems engineer for the SWIS project, bringing everything together. And then of course Wild Well Control, who are a key strategic partner of ours with regards to source control. So you can see here a comprehensive network of participants. We'll touch on it a bit later, but we're focused on exercising and bringing these participants together. Back at the beginning of last month, we completed an exercise in Houston focused on capping deployment and brought together Clarksons, Technip FMC, Wild Well Control and Trendsetter in order to be able to work through procedures which we'd had developed by Technip FMC and the roles and responsibilities through the deployment of the capping stack. So really trying to develop this and formalize it moving forward to provide that support to our members. So now focusing in on preparations, and I'll certainly be referring more to yourself here, George. But on the preparation side of things, as I said at the start, we're looking at the planning, what's considered in the source control emergency response plans, logistics plans, vessel strategy, and then importantly training. So your incident command, system awareness, SWOP, which we'll talk about, and we have an overview video of that, which is our subsea well awareness portal or training portal, which is part of our membership, and then of course exercise support. Looking at the contents of a overall of a SCERP and what's involved in that, there are very key aspects, and I said at the start that the key guidance here is really IOGP 594. That's something that we have provide access to through our website, but can share as part of the outcome of this this meeting as well. But if you look through the contents here of a typical source control plan, it focuses in both on the incident management structure, the roles that will be provided with regards to source control. It talks about relief well planning. It talks about plume study, and then the potential for capping interactions with that. So landing analysis. It talks about subsea dispersant planning. It talks about interfaces with regards to the capping stack, which may be at BOP, wellhead, lower marine pack, etc. And, you know, capping stack selection and thinking around through available connectors and ensuring that the planning is in place in order to be able to interface according to plan. A key element is the logistics element, and again, we will touch more on that on subsequent slides. Perhaps, George, to give me a break from talking, I'll pass over to you for the next couple of slides, and we'll go from there.
Okay, well, as part of your source control emergency response plan, one of the key validations you would require to do is confirming what connector you would need on the bottom of the capping stack. This is key information that OSRL needs to be able to configure it for the mobilisation. So again, your capping plans would normally specify what potential capping interface points you have on your well. So there's primarily 3 potential points. One could be the top of the LMRP, and we do have riser adapters and rigidizing tools to facilitate that interface point as well in the inventory. Another point, and probably the most desirable point, would be the top of the lower BOP with the LMRP removed. And lastly, another potential interface point would be the wellhead with the complete BOP removed. So again, your capping plan should ideally be exploring those 3 options and documenting what specific connector you would need for each of those scenarios within your plans. And again, doing this stuff in the planning phase helps us in the response phase, because OSRL can then configure the cap accordingly to your needs.
And what I'd add is that this is an area of focus within the members to look at increasing the connectors that we hold within our stockpile. Currently, globally, we have HCH4 connectors at each of the bases. We have HC connectors at each of the bases, and we have an E/F in Houston. And we're looking to grow that with an additional E/F this year, an additional 10K HC this year, and rolling into next year, DX10 as well. We've just had a DX10 introduced into the inventory about a month ago. So this is an area that we're looking at. And focused on really around trying to make sure that the service is comprehensive with regards to this interface. And as George points out, this is a critical thing to make sure that all the planning is in place. Helps us to be able to get the equipment ready for you, but also it means that you're prepared. Next slide, George, you okay to take this one?
Yeah, I guess another key validation is, can you land a cap onto your well? With 2 of the OSRL caps are full bore 18 3/4 caps, therefore there should be no issues of landing them. 2 of the caps are smaller bore diameter, and they are subject to more uplift forces. So there is an initial screening tool that's available through OSRL, and that's purely for initial screening only. So that will assess the discharge figures coming from your well, the uplift that exerts on the capping site, and confirm whether we can land the capping site with those uplift forces. If there's any ambiguity on that or any concerns, then we would recommend you use one of the GSRN partners to do some well-specific CFD analysis to confirm your cap landing. But again, this is mostly applicable when you're looking at the small bore capping sites as opposed to the 18 3/4 full bore. You're on mute, aren't you?
Classic. As I spoke about when I was giving a run through of the what's included within the contents of a source control emergency response plan, one of the critical elements is regards to response time modelling, and we have the expertise to help develop these. Clearly, we have a defined response time that we're working to in the event of a mobilisation, but we're here to help in that regard and trying to understand with regards to how all the equipment comes together and the necessary resources that you will need in order to be able to expedite the response is really key to understand that in advance. So you'd be thinking about whether or not you need to be air freighting, or is sea transportation the most likely and best solution, etc., and considering risk in that too. We can obviously have access our GSRN partners to help support these activities, and Bertling are obviously a recognised global logistics provider who, again, we have a good relationship with. Anything you want to add on response time, George?
Just on the air freight of the air freightable capping stack, one of the key validations is, can your receiving airport take the AN124 with the payload of the capping stack on it? And to facilitate that, what OSRL have done is we've actually engaged a specialist aircraft operator and logistics company to pre-identify a whole host of different receiving airports and make sure that they are clear to do that. So that due diligence has already been done for a large number of existing airports.
Of course, that information can be available and is made available to members. So thanks, George.
Just to complement that, Andy, on the AN124 availability with regards to the ongoing conflicts, we do issue fortnightly updates on AN124 availability to our subscribers as well, to make sure that we do have that capability still in the toolbox. And to complement that, if there was no AN124s available, we have refined the logistics to allow non-AN124 air freight of the equipment and just Boeing 747 freight aircraft. So all of that has been done in anticipation of potentially not being able to source an AN124 aircraft in the timeframes that we would be looking for.
Excellent. I think that was one of the questions in the chat that we can address as we get towards the end. Thanks, George. Okay, the next slide gives an overview. I've got a video here that gives a quick overview of the sea response software. I'll just click play and then go on mute. Excellent. So you can see from that overview that the SIRT-Response software, which is offered again through the membership, is a digital tool, one of a few digital tools that we've developed with our members in order to be able to support the vessel sourcing, vessel tracking, and trying to really provide some intelligence. That was developed. The OEM of this is Clarksons Maritech, and through the agreements we have in the GSRN, that also provides access to potentially through to Clarksons for broking services if that's required. So thinking more around preparing and training, IMT, so incident management team training, you obviously need to be thinking about the structure, who will be providing and fulfilling the various roles. Obviously, we're focused here with regards to source control and the source control branch, but importantly, providing people with the training and the expertise so that when this unlikely but potentially high consequence events occur, that we can rapidly mobilize people to work together. And I think it's important to understand that the source control branch will be part of the wider IMT, which potentially could be a significantly sized organization. So that's something to consider in the planning stage well in advance. We've mentioned around mutual aid and how those frameworks can potentially help, particularly under the Subsea banner with regards to source control expertise. But all of these considerations need to be put in place in advance. OSRL can provide the integrated ICS training, and we'll talk in a minute around the additional training that we can provide specific to subsea awareness as well. George, anything you want to add on this slide?
No, I guess I'll cover it when we go through the SWOP portal.
Okay, so I'll pass over to you for this one, and I'll try and manage the video.
Okay, just before we start the video, I guess it's fair to say a subsea source control response would be a very complex and challenging undertaking. We do have multiple resources available to enable an effective response. Andy's already covered the resources available through OSRL. That's both the hardware and the technical services available through the GSRN. To complement those, there is also a globally recognised incident management process to help structure an emergency response on the people side. That's the Incident Command System, and OSRL offers courses on that. The IOGP actually took the ICS a step further and made it specific for source control response. So within IOGP 591 for competency and skills, there's a rather comprehensive source control branch structure in there that can be used in a response. Another key document from IOGP that Andy's already mentioned was the 594 document on source control planning. So with all of these resources, both equipment and capabilities, technical capabilities and guidance, OSRL created the SWOP portal, the Subsea Well Awareness portal, to weave all these resources together and to assist subscribers in equipping potential responders with a baseline knowledge of a subsea source control response and how OSRL network of services could help in that response. So specifically, the portal adopts the same terminology as IOGP 594. So that's prepare in the left-hand side of the bow tie and respond on the right-hand side of the bow tie. Could you go further on, Andy, to the people section? So again, on the people portion, we adopted the same approach as the ICS and the IOGP guidance. So within each of these activities under the source control branch, we've got a job description. It outlines the key skills that a responder should possess to fulfill that role, and also a list of initial activities that they may need to get involved in. So again, the terminology and structure of the portal remains consistent with IOGP 591, just to avoid any confusion. Want to continue, Andy, to resources? Yes, Andy has already spoken about the resources, so I won't dwell on this too much, but the resources are split into both equipment, which is the capping stacks and all the ancillary equipment that enables capping, and the GSRN with regards to the technical services and capabilities that we have through the GSRN. On the GSRN side, we've got the vessel sourcing. We didn't touch on this, Andy, but the vessel sourcing from Clarkson is not just a tool for the response phase, it's also a tool that can be used in the prepare phase. So, for example, you can use it for as an assurance tool to demonstrate to regulators that you can actually implement the plans that you have in place. Without having the vessels available, you cannot implement the plans. So it can be used as a screening tool proactively while you're commencing your operations, particularly going into the reservoir, to confirm that you have the vessels that you would need to implement your plans within a reasonable distance of your activities. Also within the GSRN, we can facilitate worst case discharge modelling and also those class checks for the CAP interfaces. So there's a whole suite of activities that can be done there. Andy, can you go to the, we're on prepare. So in the prepare section, this is really adapting the general available equipment and resources and making these specific for the well and region in question where our subscriber is operating. So again, these are closely aligned with the IOGB 594 guidance. Typically, the prepare section would be divided into, it can either be 3 discrete plans or it can be one plan that covers all 3 elements, but typically it would be the secondary BOP activation that Andy mentioned with regards to the SIRT package. Looking at well capping, and this can be quite extensive, so the due diligence required in well capping could involve determining your potential interface points, your logistics planning, whether you can deploy subsea dispersant if it's a viable response strategy for your region. Confirm if you've got vertical access over your well. So again, you could use our GSRN partners to perform CFD and plume analysis. And if you do have question marks over being able to have vertical access, we could then pre-plan for an offset installation method as well. So the well capping planning section can be quite extensive. Onto the response section. This is essentially taking all the benefit and preparedness that you've spent in the left-hand prepare section and leveraging the benefits in the response to make an effective response. So on here, we're just outlining a series of different missions that could be adopted in a typical response. And these missions are also dovetailed with the Clarkson software. So when you select a mission on the software, it will find the specific vessel that would be required to fulfill that mission. For example, filtering on vessels with a 400-ton crane, for example, to allow you to deploy the cap. I think that's it, Andy.
Thanks, George. Just keeping going, mindful of time here. So I think we've already spoken around this, around exercise support. So, but I guess the key message is that source control exercises are vital for building that team capability and awareness. And we can provide obviously that direct support to you, and we were experienced in facilitating those sorts of activities. And I mentioned earlier on around the exercise we completed at the beginning of March, bringing together the GSRN partners. Just a couple of slides to wrap up, and then we will roll into the some of the questions, Christina. So thinking about membership, just want to make sure that everyone's aware around how this comes together. Quite simply, there are 2 memberships which cover access to the global subsea equipment inventory that we have and the associated services as we've spoken through. And we have the capping service, which brings together the SIRT equipment, water column monitoring, dispersant delivery system, capping stacks and ancillaries, and the offset installation equipment. It provides access to 1 out of the 2 SIRTs, the water column monitoring, the DDS, and 2 out of the 4 capping stacks in the event of a response. So it's split. So we have all of that grouped together within the capping service, and then under the containment service, this is the inventory as we're speaking about with regards to essentially putting in place the temporary pilot production system, and that's offered as a separate service as required. So Q&A. Christina, I think there should be some questions I think I saw coming in the chat. We've got 5 minutes.
Hi. So I'll just do a quick apology in case I pronounce anybody's name wrong. So our first question is from Mahmood, and this is in regard to the capping stack. And he's asked, is total 6 around the world, or 2 of the 4 are air freightable?
2 of the 4. So we have 4 capping stacks currently within our SWIS inventory globally. We also have the OSPRAG capping stack, which is ring-fenced to the UKCS, which is based in Aberdeen. But as we're talking about the SWIS services, there's 4 capping stacks globally.
Brilliant. Dior Dajel, hope that the Antonov aircraft will be available, and to which water depths can the capping stack be deployed?
Yeah, I think George touched on what we've done as far as we practically can to mitigate around our members' understanding of availability of the AN 124 aircraft, which obviously have been unfortunately affected by the Ukraine crisis. But so that information is available. From a point of view of with regards to the water depths, the capping stacks have been designed for 12,500 feet or 3,810 meters water depth.
And our last question is, do other organisations or companies have capping stacks in their stock?
Yes, there are other providers that provide access to capping equipment, but as I hope you can see from the presentation that we've pulled together, not within the same comprehensive service as we offer. And there are a number of USPs that have been highlighted throughout this with regards to how our service is offered, how our members can collaborate together, but also with regards to specific items of equipment and service provisions that are unique to ourselves. Again, mutual aid, again, with regards to water column monitoring, DDS, offset installation equipment. So please, if you are interested, then please do come and talk to us. I'm happy for my details to be shared after the meeting, Christina.
Fabulous. I will put Andy's email address in the chat for everybody. Is there any other questions from anybody? I have allowed microphones and videos in case anybody would like to ask through their mic as well.
There's a hand up from Thomas.
Hi, Andy. Yes. Andy, do you know more or less how long it takes to develop a source control emergency response plan?
It really depends on you know, the extent, but you know, from a point of view of the experience we have, we've got you know, knowledge of creating these plans globally. So if you're operating in a specific region, we likely will have been working with one of our members to help, you know, develop plans. So I can't give you a, you know, is it 5 days, 10 days, 15 days? But, you know, we have the experience and the knowledge to be able to do it and pull that together. So working with our partners, we can pull together a quality plan for you. And if you're interested, please do reach out to us.
Okay, thank you. Yes, thank you very much.
Okay, mindful of time, I think. So I'd just like to say thank you all for taking the time to join us today. The presentation material will be shared to you. We'll also share links to the IOGP documentation. Thanks to George for providing the support to me, and we'll draw this to a close. So thanks once again, and take care, everyone.